Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I'm your host, Jonathan Eacherberg, and today I'm bringing you an author interview with Koren Shadmi, author of the book Lugosi, The Rise and Fall of Hollywood's Dracula. Before I jump into the interview, I'd love for you to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they're released. If you like the interview and want to hear more, please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Koren Shadmi is an award-winning illustrator and cartoonist who studied illustration at the School of Visual Arts in New York, where he now teaches. His graphic novels have been published in the US, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, Korea, and Israel. His previous works include Bionic, Rise of the Dungeon Master, Gygax and the Creation of D&D, and The Twilight Man, Rod Serling and the Birth of Television. He joins me today to talk about his graphic novel, Lugosi, The Rise and Fall of Hollywood's Dracula. Koren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So what was it that first prompted you to take on the story of Lugosi for a visual story like this?
I think the story is that I had a very vague knowledge of who Lugosi was, and I think the first time I heard his name was I was a Bauhaus fan when I was a teenager, so they had a song about it. And I grew up in Israel. We didn't really have reruns of the Universal monster movies, so I had a vague knowledge of who he was and what the original Dracula was. But basically, me and my wife were on a trip somewhere in the car, and we were listening to a history podcast. And there was an episode about Lugosi, and it was just such a dramatic, crazy life story. And I'd made a mental note, like, this is a good one. And years later, when I was looking for my next book, after I finished my first book with humanoids was about Rod Serling, and so I was looking for something in the same vein, and then that idea popped into my head, and I was like, why not a book about Lugosi? He's such a interesting character, such a interesting life story, and also you get to learn a little bit about the history of Hollywood.
Sure, for sure. So now I want to talk a little bit about the visuals in the book. You chose to go with pretty much an all monochrome color palette in the book. There's a little bit of kind of gentle coloration to it in the scenes where Lugosi is an older man. What prompted you to use black and white for this story particularly?
Well, again, it fits the subject matter, where most of the movies that, if not all of them, the movies that Lugosi was in were black and white. So I feel like it evokes that kind of silver age, or I don't know if to call it silver age is comics, but silver screen, like
Right.
black and white, not really noir, but that early era of Hollywood. So it kind of evocates that, and it fits really well. Plus, it's less work. So coloring is a lot of work. So I was happy to not have to color this the newest book that is coming out is full color, and so I was like, sure, I'll do a color book, and then I realized how much work it is, and so I was glad that it kind of fit in with the subject matter.
Sure. And to that point, when you're doing a book like this, do you take care of all of the illustration, the coloring, the letters as well? Everything is done by you?
Everything other than the lettering. The publisher Humanoids actually got a letterer who did an excellent job on the book, and I'm really glad that they did, because I feel like lettering might not be my strongest suit. It's like an art form on its own, and for me it's just like not, I don't really think, to me it's not that important, but to readers it's really important, so I'm glad they did. But everything else, I did the research and the writing, and the layouts and drawing and pretty much everything. I like to compare it to those one-man bands that walk in with the drum and the harmonica and all that stuff. So I'm just that person that does all that stuff. So
Great. And what would you say is kind of the hardest part? And you say you're doing it as a one-man band. What's the hardest part about telling a story like this in a visual way in a book like this?
Well, when you're doing a nonfiction book, you have to do a lot of research that's both text-based and visual-based, and you have to stay really, you have to be as accurate as you can. So, I can't just make up how people look like. Lugosi's face changed over the years. I have to make sure that I capture his likeness over the years as he ages, and I have to make sure that when I set a scene in Hungary and like the turn of the century, it needs to look like Hungary in the turn of the century. So I had to look for specific pictures of Budapest, and had to it's more work than, let's say, a sci-fi novel that's a graphic novel that's set in the year 3000, because then you can just kind of make up everything. And these books you can't. So there's likenesses, and there's a lot of visual research that goes into it.
Right. Now, what were a couple of things that you maybe learned about Lugosi in that research that you didn't know before going in that you want to make sure people are aware of?
Well, first, that he was a very active. He was kind of an activist, and he was in a socialist party in Budapest in Hungary around the turn of the century. There was a lot, or early 20th century. There was a lot of upheaval there, and he was fighting for actors' rights, for workers' rights, and demonstrating and doing all sorts of stuff like that, which ended up also being the reason why he had to flee Hungary, because he was, the regime changed, and they started hanging people who had, been a socialist that opposed the current, whoever was the current head of the state. And so that's why he fled. He fled to Germany, and then finally, like, to the U.S. So that was kind of an interesting part. I'm trying to think what else. There was a lot of his movies that I didn't know about, and during the process of research, I got to watch some of them, and so I was very happy to kind of discover movies that I haven't seen. And so, Son of Frankenstein was one of my favorites that I've never seen before. And through the process of research, I got to see it, and he was just amazing in it. And the movie's, really funny, doesn't take itself too seriously, but is also really visually striking. And also, The Black Cat was another one that I just really was impressed with. So there was, through the process of research, you kind of get to discover also works of art that you've never seen before.
Excellent. And speaking of those works of art, obviously Lugosi's probably most famous for playing Dracula. But some people might not know that he was almost in Frankenstein as well, playing the monster that eventually was played by Boris Karloff. How do you think his life and career might have been different if he had stayed on and played that other famous role?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, he would have, maybe would have set him on a different trajectory. He has this kind of self-sabotaging part to him that makes me think that even if he wasn't Frankenstein, there would still have been some sort of decline. But I'm not sure, and I'm not sure he would have been right for Frankenstein, and that's what James Whale ended up, deciding that he wasn't right for it. I mean, there's various accounts, but at the end of the day, what the account that seemed most correct to me was that he was, just not right for the role. And that kind of changed his life, and maybe was unfortunate, but I think Karloff makes an amazing Frankenstein, and you can't know what would have happened.
Right. In an alternate universe, for sure. Now, there's been so many adaptations of Dracula, be it on stage and films, on television. And we're still seeing them today. We had Renfield earlier this year. We have, I think, the Last Voyage of the Demeter coming out, or that has just come out. What do you think it is about this story that fascinates people, and how does it relate to Lugosi as a man and as an actor?
Well, I think the innovation of Bram Stoker was that he showed Dracula as this like gentleman, as a charming, cultured society man account that is kind of a very alluring and maybe even seductive character. And then the monster is hidden, and that makes him more human because with human beings it's the same thing. The monstrosity or whatever is lurking in the underneath is usually hidden. You don't know. Someone could be very handsome or very beautiful. A woman can be very beautiful, and then they could have this awful personality underneath, or they could be abusive or whatever. And I think that's what kind of connected with people at the end of the day.
Excellent. Now, you had a pretty extensive bibliography at the end of the book, and it's not something you always see in a graphic novel like this. Were there any particular references, books, or articles that people should check out if they enjoyed yours and want to learn even more about Lugosi?
I mean, there are, it's been a while, so I don't remember exactly. There's a couple of books from different eras about him. And, since I've done already research I'm like in the third, basically now have done another book and another book after that. So I'm not, I can't fully recall all the names of the books. But whatever is mentioned in the bibliography, you can look it up, and some of them are more extensive than others, and some of them are like more concise, but they all pretty much give a similar picture. There's no biography that it's like completely crazy and doesn't match with the rest of the stories. There's one that's from the 70s that was approved by the estate that's pretty good, and it's kind of hard to find. And so that one is recommended. I like it a lot. I think the other one that I like, I think it was called The Dark Prince, and that was an excellent one. And Yeah, some of them go, I was the only ones that kind of bored me a little bit were the ones that dealt with his theater career, because, there was also no room. He had this whole theater career that I didn't really have space to go into. I go into it briefly in the graphic novel, but don't dive that deep. And, the ones the biographies that focus on his theater career were not as interesting to me.
Excellent. Now, I have a couple of questions not specifically related to the book, but before I move on, is there anything else you want to touch on about the book specifically?
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the previous question of what Lugosi brought to the role is, because I talked about Bram Stoker, and Bram Stoker picked this, made this really iconic character that was, unforgettable. And I think Lugosi was perfect for it because he was that European debonair, charming man that you could believe was from royalty. He really wasn't. He was like a middle class, but he makes it. You really believe it when you see him as Dracula, and the accent and the kind of he's kind of delicate but also forceful, and there's a lot of kind of contradiction and nuance in his performance. And I think he made the character, he brought him to life for the first time, and he made the template for the rest of the people who would play Dracula. And then when you see, you mentioned Renfield, you see Nicolas Cage playing Dracula. He says his favorite Dracula is Christopher Lee, but he's really evoking, I think, more than anyone, Lugosi, and he kind of looks like Lugosi in that movie.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this might be the hardest question I ask, and you've obviously watched a lot of films in your career, and you mentioned watching a bunch for preparing for the book. But if you had to pick your top three, what would they be?
Oh wow. Well, I really like Videodrome by David Cronenberg. I recently rewatched it with my brother. He's never seen it, and he was kind of freaked out by the whole thing. So I love Videodrome. Completely unrelated, or on the other side of the spectrum, I really like the 400 Blows. I think it's just such an amazing movie, and so touching, and just like the quintessential Nouvelle Vague film, and just every time I see it, like it's still moving. And then I think my top movie ever is probably Vertigo. I just absolutely love it. I think it's just so beautiful to look at, and mesmerizing, and it's just a world on its own, and many layered kind of like movie that you can watch 10 times, 20 times, and not get bored with.
Sure. I don't know if there's a graphic novel version of that film, but if there isn't, that might be something for you in the future. Do you have any other books that you could recommend that you've been reading recently, be they nonfiction for other research or fiction books, novels, anything that you're checking out these days?
Yeah, I read one of my favorite things that I read recently was a book by Nick Dresnall. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but it's called Acting Class. It's a graphic novel, and it is just amazing. It's just this, and it's kind of related to film because, I mean, not really, but it has a kind of a filmic quality, and it does deal with acting.
Mhm.
But if you want a book that will really get under your skin and creep you out, it's really excellent. So that's something recent that I read that I just absolutely love.
Great. And lastly, before we wrap things up, what projects do you have lined up? You mentioned that you've been working on a couple of other books. Anything you want to shout out there?
Yeah, there's actually a book coming out next week, and it's called All Tomorrow's Parties, and it's a nonfiction biography of the Velvet Underground. So it's my next book after Lugosi. Very different, as I said, full color. It deals with a band. It's an ensemble piece, and I'm very proud of it. I think it's really excellent. But again, it's like a very different beast than the Lugosi book. But I think that whoever likes the band or just wants to find out more about that era in the 60s in New York and Warhol and all that stuff would really enjoy that book. And other than that, I'm starting to develop the next nonfiction book, but it's still under wraps, so I can't really talk about it.
Sounds good. Well, we'll be looking forward to those two coming out. Hopefully the first one coming out soon, and the next one coming out in the near future as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Koren, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciated being able to speak with you and for sharing the information and the stories and all the great news, great details about Lugosi.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me.
Thank you again to my guest today, Koren Shadmi. We discussed his previous book, Lugosi, The Rise and Fall of Hollywood's Dracula, and his latest book, All Tomorrow's Parties, The Velvet Underground Story, just released on August 22nd. I'll have a link in the show notes to both of those books, along with the movies and books mentioned throughout the interview. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eaterberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eaterberg. Please come back for my next episode, where I will be speaking with Brad Weissman about his upcoming book, Horror Unmasked, A History of Terror from Nosferatu to Nope. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.